The ceasefire was supposed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. On paper, it did, but in reality, one of the world's most critical energy corridors is still operating under invisible constraints, where ships hesitate, routes bend unnaturally, and control may be shifting in ways that extend far beyond conventional warfare. What appears to be stability may in fact be something far more fragile. A system still under pressure, still contested, and still one miscalculation away from escalation. Shipping data indicates that commercial vessels and oil tankers are no longer cleared to transit the central corridor. This corridor once served as the primary artery sustaining global energy flows prior to the outbreak of hostilities. Instead, large tonnage vessels are being forced to reroute, executing wide, evasive navigation patterns that increase transit time, complexity, and overall risk exposure. According to statements from Iran's foreign ministry, these restrictions are attributed to unresolved technical factors. Within a military context, that term carries significant ambiguity. Behind it lies a spectrum of operational possibilities. One of the most credible assessments points to the presence of uncleared naval mines, necessitating direct oversight by Iranian naval forces. Under this scenario, vessels are escorted and guided through corridors designated as relatively safe under controlled conditions. However, a more consequential scenario is also in play. Iran may be leveraging the situation to tighten its control envelope, compelling vessels to transit through its territorial waters rather than international lanes. If confirmed, this would represent not merely a security measure, but a strategic pressure point, granting Tehran the capability to monitor, regulate, and potentially restrict traffic through one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. Despite the nominal reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, actual shipping throughput remains far from normalized. Current traffic averages approximately 20 vessels per day, an improvement from the pre-ceasefire low of just 3, yet still significantly below pre-conflict levels. This suggests that the corridor is operating in a hybrid state, partially open, but under persistent control and constraint. Every fluctuation at this strategic bottleneck is being closely monitored. What concerns analysts most is not the figure of 20 vessels per day, but the fragility of that number. It can degrade at any moment under current conditions. On paper, a ceasefire between the United States, Iran, and Israel is in effect. In the operational environment, the reality remains far more volatile and far less stable. The root of the issue appears to lie within Iran's internal command structure, where signs point to incomplete compliance with top-level directives or a breakdown in the chain of command, preventing ceasefire orders from fully reaching ballistic missile units. Operational evidence supports this. Within minutes of Donald Trump announcing the ceasefire, Iran launched ballistic missiles toward Israel, reportedly employing cluster munitions. Submunitions struck Tel Aviv, effectively turning a densely populated urban area into an active strike zone. The near-zero gap between diplomatic signaling and kinetic action underscores a critical reality. The ceasefire has not taken hold on the battlefield. A dangerous lag persists between political intent and operational control, especially given the semi-autonomous nature of missile forces. While such delays are not unprecedented, the scale and persistence are concerning. More than 14 hours after the ceasefire, hostilities not only continued, they expanded. Israel is no longer the sole target. The conflict has extended into the Gulf, with the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar now within the strike envelope. Several states have already initiated retaliatory responses, increasing the risk of uncontrolled escalation. Paradoxically, this surge is not occurring at the peak of hostilities, but during what is officially labeled a ceasefire. This indicates that battlefield dynamics are moving beyond conventional control frameworks. Two primary scenarios are under assessment. First, Iran's command and control chain may be disrupted, preventing orders from being fully transmitted to operational units. Second, the national leadership may not exercise full authority over its armed forces. Under either scenario, current developments align with repeated warnings from the United States. the potential existence of semi-independent military power centers capable of acting outside political intent. If that condition holds, the ceasefire no longer functions as a stabilizing mechanism. Instead, it creates a dangerous operational gap, one in which conflict can expand along unpredictable vectors. In this environment, Washington's priority extends beyond halting hostilities to identifying who holds effective control within Iran. This is no longer a purely diplomatic question, but a decisive factor in determining whether any agreement has real-world enforcement value. As a result, a series of verification measures has been initiated to assess the actual authority of the negotiating party. One of the clearest tests has been whether Iran would permit maritime transit through the Strait of Hormuz. In response, Tehran authorized approximately 10 vessels to pass through the corridor during an initial phase. This indicates that the Strait of Hormuz has, at minimum, been partially reopened. It also suggests that the negotiating authority retains operational control over naval forces responsible for managing one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. However, the issue is that this control does not appear to extend across the entire military system. While naval forces signal compliance, ballistic missile units continue to operate independently, exposing clear fragmentation within Iran's command structure. This creates a high-risk paradox. One element can reopen the Strait of Hormuz for transit, while another continues missile launches, pushing the region back toward escalation. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, U.S. forces conducted a press briefing following roughly 1 month of operations under Operation Epic Fury. Pete Hegseth faced direct questioning over battlefield conditions, particularly Iran's continued strikes despite the ceasefire. A key exchange came from Mary Margaret of the Daily Wire, who challenged the discrepancy. Iran claims safe transit through the Strait of Hormuz is coordinated with its forces under unspecified technical restrictions. What do those restrictions actually entail? Reports indicate Iran continued strikes into the morning. Where is the boundary of any post-ceasefire grace period? These are not tactical questions. They strike at the core issue. Is the United States negotiating with a unified command authority, or merely one node within a fragmented system where parallel forces act on independent logic, regardless of diplomatic commitments? Doubt is increasing. Is there an unofficial grace period following the ceasefire? Or are current developments simply the result of a breakdown in command synchronization? With hostilities ongoing and strikes continuing, analysts are reassessing the core question. What is actually happening behind the diplomatic messaging? At the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth delivered a blunt, pragmatic response. Iran will say a lot of things. The statement underscores a key principle of modern warfare. Political declarations are fluid. Operational reality is decisive. From the U.S. perspective, what matters is execution, not rhetoric. In this case, the Strait of Hormuz has been reopened to a degree. Commercial traffic is moving, and global markets have reacted accordingly. At the same time, military activity is being monitored in real time. Isolated strikes and sporadic engagements persist, indicating the ceasefire has not been uniformly enforced. Iran must rapidly transmit and enforce clear orders across all units, especially those continuing missile launches and localized strike operations. In a decentralized military structure, transitioning from active conflict to ceasefire is not instantaneous. It requires time, synchronization, and firm command authority. This transition phase is the most dangerous, where misalignment can trigger unintended escalation. U.S. messaging remains cautious but clear. Forces are postured for all contingencies, but the priority is to sustain the ceasefire. What exists now is a fragile equilibrium. Confidence remains limited, but the window for de-escalation is still open. A new overnight development has further complicated the operational picture: a strike on an Iranian oil facility on Lavon Island. This was not an isolated blast, but a direct hit on strategic energy infrastructure. What stands out is Washington's immediate response. U.S. officials moved quickly to deny involvement by both the United States and Israel. With the two most likely actors ruled out, an intelligence gap has emerged, fueling widespread speculation. One notable assessment suggests that aircraft from the United Arab Emirates were operating in the area at the time of the strike. If confirmed, this would mark a major shift, potentially the first instance of a Gulf state directly or overtly conducting a strike against Iran. At this stage, all assessments remain speculative. No verified evidence has been presented to confirm the involvement of the United Arab Emirates. In parallel, another scenario is gaining traction: a potential false flag operation designed to redirect attribution and prolong the conflict. Under this framework, Israel is cited as a possible actor, though no official confirmation exists. The volume of competing narratives highlights a critical reality. The battle space now extends beyond physical operations into the information domain, where the line between verified intelligence and speculation is increasingly blurred. Until attribution is established, the strike on Lavon Island remains a strategic unknown, with the potential to shift the regional balance. In false flag scenarios, no option can be ruled out, including internal execution. One credible hypothesis is that elements within Iran may have orchestrated the strike. Given internal complexity, this would not be without precedent. As seen in other states, factions may exist that oppose de-escalation. If such groups retain access to military capabilities, they could act independently to disrupt the ceasefire. This introduces a more complex threat environment: the possibility that escalation is being driven not externally, but from within. The conflict, in this case, is not only interstate, but also a contest among internal power centers. At present, however, all scenarios remain unconfirmed. Ground truth is obscured by dense, conflicting information and ongoing speculation. Meanwhile, Israel's response reflects a calculated, pragmatic approach. According to officials from the White House, Israel is formally part of the ceasefire framework reached between the United States and Iran. However, the critical limitation is scope. The agreement applies only to direct Israel-Iran engagement, not to Iran-backed proxy forces across the region. This explains why reports from Lebanon indicate no effective ceasefire on that front. Israeli operations continue, and the confrontation with Hezbollah remains active. The current ceasefire is therefore not comprehensive. It is a localized arrangement with clearly defined boundaries. The region is now operating in a hybrid state, neither full war nor full peace. De-escalation is declared at the strategic level, while tactical level operations persist across multiple hotspots. This overlap creates a highly volatile environment, where any incident could trigger renewed escalation. The ceasefire is not only fragile, but also marked by inconsistencies in interpretation and enforcement. Initially, Shahbaz Sharif, acting as a key intermediary, stated that Hezbollah was included in the agreement. If accurate, Israeli strikes in Lebanon would have been expected to pause, at least temporarily. Subsequent developments contradicted that claim. Benjamin Netanyahu issued a direct statement clarifying that the ceasefire does not extend to Lebanon. This position was later reinforced by Donald Trump, confirming that Hezbollah falls outside the agreement's scope. As a result, Israel remains unrestricted in its military operations in Lebanon. In practical terms, the ceasefire has been narrowed to a limited segment of the battlefield, leaving other fronts fully active. However, the situation is no longer static. Within hours, Israel escalated operations to a new level. Large-scale airstrikes were executed at a tempo not seen since the conflict began. In under 10 minutes, nearly 100 strikes hit Beirut, turning the capital's airspace into an active fire zone. This is no longer tactical engagement. It is sustained, high-intensity firepower, signaling clear escalation. The already fragile ceasefire is now at risk of collapse. With inconsistent interpretations of its scope and continued high-tempo strikes on active fronts, the ceasefire exists largely on paper, while conditions on the ground deteriorate rapidly. Regional dynamics are shifting in a dangerous direction. Iranian media report that Iran is preparing to withdraw from the agreement. Tehran has also declined to attend scheduled direct talks in Pakistan, citing ongoing strikes in Lebanon. This signals a loss of confidence in the agreement's validity as battlefield reality diverges from formal commitments. At the same time, Iran continues to call for an end to hostilities, while taking a more strategic step, halting oil tanker transit through the Strait of Hormuz. This is a high-impact move. While other goods may still flow, oil tankers represent the dominant share of traffic through this corridor. Restricting oil transit is not just an economic measure, it is a clear escalation signal, as a state controlling a global energy choke point begins to tighten access. This indicates the conflict has entered a new phase, where geopolitical tools are deployed alongside military force, less than 12 hours after the ceasefire was announced. The sequence of events points to a high risk of total breakdown. Continued strikes, disputes over scope, Iran's withdrawal posture, and tightening control over the Strait of Hormuz all signal that the ceasefire is rapidly degrading into a brief operational pause before renewed escalation. Latest developments show a shift in trajectory. Iran is now using the Strait of Hormuz as a strategic pressure point. Tehran has moved to halt oil tanker transit following Israeli strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon, a calculated transition from direct military confrontation to economic leverage. Earlier the same day, limited tanker traffic was still moving, indicating that the corridor was not fully closed. The rapid shift to restriction suggests a deliberate, conditional trigger tied to escalation in Lebanon. From the Israeli side, senior officials warn that Iran is leveraging control of the choke point to pressure the global energy system. Disruption at this node carries immediate spillover into international oil markets. The use of the strait as a strategic lever further reinforces this shift, integrating economic coercion with military operations. With the ceasefire losing effectiveness, this move could act as a catalyst for broader escalation. Current indicators also suggest Iran's strategy may expand beyond maritime control to include regional energy infrastructure targets. According to reports, an Iranian strike has hit the east-west oil pipeline in Saudi Arabia, causing significant damage to a transport route considered the backbone of the kingdom's export system. This is a high-value strategic target, as the pipeline enables Saudi Arabia to move oil without full reliance on vulnerable maritime routes. The attack not only inflicts material damage, but also reduces Riyadh's flexibility in sustaining supply to global markets. When viewed alongside Iran's tightening control over the Strait of Hormuz, a clear two-pronged strategy emerges. On one axis, Iran exerts control over the world's most critical sea lane. On the other, it targets overland alternatives. This creates dual pressure on the global energy supply system. Leveraging both geographic position and military capability to apply pressure indicates a shift toward a comprehensive strategy, where energy becomes a central strategic instrument. In the context of a weakening ceasefire, these moves are not merely reactive. They signal the onset of a new phase of escalation, with impacts extending well beyond the Middle East. This concludes our coverage, for now. Share your perspective and join the discussion